All right, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fanon, and in this video, we're going to talk about something that the great Floyd Mayweather Jr. said about Jaron Ennis and Saul Canelo Alvarez in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fanon. In this video, we're going to have some fun because I know what I'm going to talk about are some things that Canelo Alvarez fans are not going to want to hear. Floyd Mayweather Jr. But before I do that, let me back up 1 second. Before I do that, please make sure to hit the like button before you leave the video. Also, make sure to hit the subscribe button if you're not subscribed, and hit the bell icon so you can be notified of when we release more videos. All right, so we're talking about what Floyd Mayweather Jr. has said recently about Jaron Ennis and Canelo Alvarez. A few weeks back, he was mentioning what, about Canelo Alvarez and basically saying that Canelo Alvarez is getting a lot of attention in boxing right now. But as far as being the best fighter in boxing, the pound for pound best fighter in the world, he does not believe that Canelo Alvarez is that. In fact, he said that his number one guy in the sport as far as pound for pound would be Terrence Crawford. But he also mentions Jaron Ennis as one of the guys that need to be getting the same amount of consideration as Canelo Alvarez is as far as being a great fighter, right? So for me, that means a lot for the following reason. I remember when Canelo Alvarez was coming up, when on the undercards of Floyd Mayweather Jr. And a lot of boxing fans who are new to the sport or younger boxing fans or guys that really, aren't very, casual boxing fans, I guess is a better way to say it. Dante's Boxing Nation would say decafs, but I won't steal his material. You get for the most part what I'm talking about. You have people that think that pretty much follow what the media has to say about specific fighters and go all in for one particular fighter and believe that nobody in the world can beat that guy, that nobody in the world that has ever fought before that can beat the guy. So you get like this hero worship of boxers that I do believe starts when the mainstream media really starts pushing them and really takes what they can do and what they've and their abilities way out of pocket, right? But the longer that you watch boxing and the more you pay attention to it closely, you can, and some people are very good at it, some people are not, to really spot the excellent fighters on the way up in the game before they've actually have the box records to stand, and have fought a bunch of ex-champions and this, that, and the other thing. It's a real skill set to be able to look at a fighter on the way up and know what you have in that fighter. And when Floyd Mayweather Jr. compares Canelo Alvarez to Canelo Alvarez, understand that Floyd Mayweather Jr. is one of the people that spotlighted Canelo Alvarez early in his career and talked about what a great fighter Canelo Alvarez was going to be, and actually brought Canelo Alvarez along on his undercards, as did Steven Espinoza on Showtime. So when Showtime, and people forget this, Canelo Alvarez, when he fought his last fight on Showtime, was actually going back to the place where he was originally discovered in the United States and going back and fighting under the same network that originally gave him his shot. It was not Showtime that discovered, or HBO that's discovered Canelo Alvarez. Canelo Alvarez went to HBO after he got his start when Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Oscar De La Hoya were partnering each other, when Floyd Mayweather Jr. or Mayweather Promotions was pretty much promoting under the banner of Golden Boy, and that was before the beginning of the PBC. And so when a lot of fighters broke off from Golden Boy, and that would be guys like Keith Thurman, Sean Porter, Errol Spence Jr. I think maybe Errol Spence Jr. might have signed to the PBC, but Deontay Wilder and these guys, Canelo Alvarez was with Golden Boy at the same time that Deontay Wilder was with Golden Boy. and that Keith Thurman was with Golden Boy, and Sean Porter were with Golden Boy. All those guys were with Golden Boy, and then they defected over to PBC. The Showtime left. Golden Boy left and went over to HBO and took Canelo Alvarez with him. So when Floyd Mayweather Jr. is talking about Canelo Alvarez and Jaron Boots Ennis and comparing the two of them, understand that this is a guy that saw what Canelo Alvarez was before Canelo Alvarez hit the mainstream media. So for him to say that that Jaron Ennis is that type of fighter, and I do suspect what he believes that Canelo Alvarez, and I've actually heard other people say this, and I do believe that this is myself, that Jaron Ennis is actually somebody that probably has more talent than Canelo Alvarez does, can do more things in the ring than Canelo Alvarez can do. And if he is given the opportunity to grow and given the matches to fight, could actually become bigger than Canelo Alvarez is. And for people who can say, oh, that will never happen, all of that, do not get so excited and say something like that, because truth be told, Canelo Alvarez isn't as big as Floyd Mayweather Jr. is. He's not as good a fighter as Floyd Mayweather Jr. is, despite the fact that a lot of people want to claim that because he was in his, what do they say? He was in his, that he was not fully developed, or he wasn't in his prime when he fought Floyd Mayweather Jr. First of all, personally, I do not buy that, because the dude was 23 years old and he had 40 professional fights. He had defended the WBA title 6 times. And from what I can see of Canelo Alvarez then versus now, Canelo Alvarez is probably a smarter fighter now than he was when he fought Floyd Mayweather Jr., but not necessarily physically physically a better fighter than he was then. His footwork doesn't look as good as it did then, now as it did then. He looks more like he's plotting after fighters, and also the fact that he's fighting this competition level that he's fighting, in my opinion, tells me, that, hey man, at what is he at, like 56 or 57 fights, that there's a lot of wear and tear on Canelo Alvarez. With Jaron Ennis, and I'm telling you, this is not an if, it's a when. Not if there's going to be another great American welterweight that can move all the way up to 168 pounds and dominate guys. It's not a matter for me, having paid attention to boxing my whole life, or not my whole life, since my early teens, and understanding the history of boxing, that there's a generation after generation, there are great American fighters that come on board, whether it be a Sugar Ray Robinson, or a Muhammad Ali, or a Sugar Ray Leonard, or a Floyd Mayweather Jr., or a Mike Tyson. They come at a steady pace and are consistently there as long as they're actually able to be given the chance to show what they are. So to see that that Showtime is putting up and featuring Jaron Ennis and Floyd Mayweather Jr. is talking about him like that, tells me that these guys are more than likely going to try to find, and I'm talking about the PBC, I'm talking about Showtime. Now, I know Jaron Ennis is not signed to the PBC. I do believe he's signed to Cameron Duncan as a promoter, but he's been working pretty much exclusively with Showtime Boxing. Showtime Boxing and ESPN and Steven Espinoza spotlight him and give him the opportunities to grow the same way that they did with Canelo Alvarez. Do not be surprised if what Floyd Mayweather Jr. says comes to fruition. And also, don't be surprised if Jaron Ennis could not wind up getting up to the same weight class in the same area that Canelo Alvarez is, although I do not expect at all for Canelo Alvarez to actually fight him, because I think Canelo Alvarez is on a semi-retirement cruise with a bunch of fighters that he knows that he can beat. But anyway, I just thought that was very telling, and don't brush it off, man. I'm telling you, on a regular basis, new fighters come up. There's always the next guy that's going to come up and have people talk very, very well of him. And Jaron Ennis may very well be that guy, and he may very well pass up Canelo Alvarez. And because and the reason I say that is, look at Floyd Mayweather Jr. Floyd Mayweather Jr. was not where Canelo Alvarez was when Canelo Alvarez was 26 or 27. What is he, 30 years old? Floyd didn't get there until a little bit later, but when he got there, he went through the roof. I would not be surprised at all if the same thing didn't happen for Jaron Ennis. But anyway, that's my take on the matter. You let me know what you think in the comment section. And with that, I'm out. Peace.